All right, so yesterday I picked up an old Simplicity 2010. This is my second one of this particular model. I've also got a 3210 and a B10 as well, so familiar territory for me. I'm going to do a quick overview of what I've got here, and what I'll be doing is getting it running again. The guy that I bought it from bought it a year ago for a father-son project. It never happened. And this guy's been sitting outside for a year. Prior to that, it had been sitting in a barn since the mid-'80s. I was told from the seller that he bought it from a family whose grandfather had owned it and was really pissed off when they put it in the garage and bought a new mower. Apparently the grandfather really liked this old mower, and I'll probably like it a lot too. Just a quick walkthrough. Original headlights, this one's been bent back. I might be able to bend that back. Lots of surface rust that I hope to clean up, and we'll see what I can do with just some buffing. Typical seat damage. What I'll likely do is remove the things that are growing out of it and fix it up to look like this seat over here on my other 2010. Got the full rear lift group. Looks like probably original turf tires. The deck is slightly different from what I'm used to. Usually I'm familiar with a cutout back here, so I guess it's a later model deck. Typical lift. Everything on this is extremely stiff from sitting outside, including the throttle lever needs to get replaced. It's got an hour meter here. I'll have to figure out if that says 1,010 hours or not. And let me pop the hood. Under the hood, we've got some interesting surprises. First of all, up front, we have a horn. It was wired up, and then I noticed it goes back to this extremely tidy wiring loom that goes back and around. Somebody definitely spent a lot of time and care wiring this stuff up. I'm pretty sure that cardboard is not the original, but to protect the terminals of the voltage regulator. So my job today is to pull off the front clip, pull out the motor, and give it a top end rebuild along with the carburetor, and see if I can get it fired up. So with the front clip pulled off, I also pulled off the side panels here and on the other side so I can get down to the drive shaft in there to make that disconnect. I'm draining the oil right now, and so far it's just black. No milky, no water, so that's a good sign. Pulled the alternator starter off. It's over there because it's heavy and I didn't want to have to lift it with the engine. And the next step is to pull the engine out. Of course, throttle cable, choke, wiring, the little mount broke. It goes down there. And this wire also pulled out at the same time, but we'll have this out and get it checked out. And with the motor out and starting to pull the shroud off, we can see that a mouse has lived in here, which is no surprise. It's one of the reasons to always take these things off after they've been sitting for 30 years. But I will dig in and see what I can find. Hopefully all the wires look pretty good. If not, I'll be able to do some rewiring. And we'll see what happens next when I pull the head off. So I pulled the head off, and aside from the mouse nest and lots of other debris, we found this. The metal shroud is still stuck to the head because of all these moth cocoons. Now I've seen these before in beehives. These look like wax moth cocoons, but I suppose they could be other types of moths as well. It'll be interesting to see what happens. We will just kind of continue cleaning things up. The cylinder looks fantastic. It spins nice. and it's all good. Let's give it a quick cleaning and put it back together. One concern I have is the whole magneto thing going on here. It's pretty rusted away, you can see. But I do have a spare engine outside in the shed, so I might be able to pull this item off of that. But then I gotta worry about gapping and all that good stuff. We'll see. All right, the motor is back together. I did replace the magneto in there. Put the shroud back on, everything is cleared out, so when we spin, we don't hear any mouse nest. It's still spinning freely because I have not yet torqued down the head. The head is still ever so slightly loose. Same thing with the spark plug. Took a spare carburetor because the original right here had its main jet all stripped out. I want to see if I could fix it because otherwise it's in good shape. So we'll take care of that. And soon the motor will go back over into the tractor to see if it actually fires and runs at all. I do need to have a look at the fuel tank and the wiring, but I think it might fire up pretty soon. A few things to note: I had to pull the engine back apart because I was not getting spark whatsoever. Turns out that the flywheel here was all crudded up, the magnets here, the gap was way off, so I wasn't getting a proper flow through here. So once I got this cleaned up, I gapped the armature. I pulled this wire here and clipped a multimeter to the frame here, and also to the point. When the point closes, it makes a circuit here. And using the handy dandy instructions of ignition timing and armature assembly, I was able to test this out, make sure I was getting continuity of the correct point, properly gap this, put it back together, put it back in the tractor right over there, gave it a whirl, and I was getting spark. Don't mind the electrical tape. This is what happens when you use old parts that had been chewed on by a mouse. Works fine now, but boy, I was getting some sparks holding onto this wire before. So it's not going to be a perfect fix, but we're just going for functional. So this morning's work was to do the two front wheels, pull them apart, and this one it's got a bad inner wheel bearing. I just greased it up, gonna make it work. And the other front tire over here, this one spins better. That front wheel bearing, it's in better shape, but it's seized onto the shaft, so probably want to replace that one as well. Other things that I've been working on this morning are the dashboard. I pulled out the hour meter because all it did was make lots of smoke. Pulled it apart. It looks as though it has rusted together years and years ago. So the hour meter is out of the dash, and now I have a big hole to fill, and we'll see if I come up with anything interesting to put into that spot. And next up, put the dash back on, put the motor in, and see if this thing goes. All right, we've moved on. We have changed the fluids in the transmission. We've changed the fluids in the bevel gearbox. The bevel gearbox appears to be pretty good. We got a bit of rotation, a bit of slop in here. It's not as tight as it was out of the factory for sure, but I'm gonna say that's good enough for what I'm doing. The fluid out of the bevel gearbox was nice and clean. The fluid out of the transmission was black when it pulled out. Everything's back together, motor's on, motor's in place. Had to fix a couple wires, the connectors were breaking off. We'll be giving that a firing very shortly. The latest issue was the fuel tank. The tank that I thought was good turns out is full of pinholes. Let's go take a look at that. So here's the fuel tank as it has been repaired. It came with the float type fuel gauge. It's a little sticky. The plastic was cracked and water had gotten into the tank clearly. So my solution was to actually use JB weld to fill up the pinholes that are under here. And then I put a coat of Por 15 on it, and I put fiberglass over it, and then I put more Por 15 on it. For those who haven't used Por 15, it's almost an epoxy type paint. It hardens fast and very hard, and it works really well for glassing things over. Petcock down here, the fuel shutoff, was leaky. I pulled it apart, put it in an O-ring, and used some Forma gasket on the threads to help seal things up. And so far it appears to be holding fuel without any leaks whatsoever. So I'm going to call that a success, put it back into the tractor, and see if it makes it go. So I had to pull the engine out again. I actually had it running very briefly. The machine was running, did a circle of the garage out here, and it just quit. No spark. And I tried both double checking the points and condenser to make sure they were working. I've got a Nova 2 electronic ignition. I tried that, still no spark. So what I'm gonna go with next is that these contacts are a bit cruddy. I'm gonna get those all nice and shiny. The armature here definitely shows some corrosion, although the contact points do appear to be pretty shiny. I've also tried to use conductive grease where I could, just to help improve conductivity. That's what this black is. So we'll clean things up, put them back together, and test for spark, and hopefully that will get this machine running, because when it was running pretty good. No smoke, so I think it's a pretty good engine. All right, I now have spark. And what I've done is I cleaned up contacts here. They're nice and shiny. I gapped this using what I was told is a business card, which is actually a mailer. I used a micrometer that is 0.012, which is roughly the gap that we're supposed to set on the armature. Taped my spark plug wire because it was a little old and cracked. Here's a nice shiny spot here to test the spark. Also, I ditched the points and condenser here. Here's my flashlight. And instead went with the Nova 2 ignition. Pulled out all the wires since I've got the shroud off. I now have a wire coming down from here, right there, that goes up to here and then to the magneto. I also need to include a ground wire so I can shut this off. So the kill switch from the dashboard will come down and ultimately ground out this connection. I've just got a temporary setup going on here. So tested it with this fancy drill setup right on there. Was able to rotate the engine fast enough to get spark between here and there, and it was wonderful. And I should probably test it one more time before I button things up, but it's looking good. All right, one final review of the ignition wiring. We've got our magneto properly gapped. One wire is grounded on the magnet. The other wire comes out to here. This is an insulated stud. This is not actually grounded to the chassis. I have a wire coming from here, coming down to the electronic ignition. I have another wire coming down to here. This is also a insulated connection. And from here, I've got this wire, which you can barely see, which is the grounding wire. So if this grounds out, I no longer get spark. This will go to the ignition on the dashboard. The electronic ignition, like I said, comes through here, back to here. The last wire is the plug wire coming out up to the plug. That is the wiring necessary for the electronic ignition on this Briggs 10 horse. Model is 243431. And I'm getting good spark. Hopefully it stays sparky when I put it back in the tractor. All right, here it is. It's not quite all back together. I need to put the grill back on. I need to put the side covers on this side and the other side. But it's back together. It does run. Still got an issue with the carburetor. I've taken this thing apart 3 times, cleaned it, new parts. It still leaks when it's shut off, which is why I've got a drip cup down below. Fuel shut off here will help with it, but I'll probably pull it off again and try cleaning the seat for the float, and maybe I'll get it fixed, maybe not, we'll see. But in a few more minutes I'll get it fired up. Mower deck cleaned, greased, runs well, and shortly I am going to try and fire up the blower unit, or the vacuum unit, not the blower unit, and see how that's going with it. So let's see what happens next.